It started like any other, two analysts dissecting a quarterback's future. But as GBUSH listened to Jason Lloyd prop up his critique of Shedeur Sanders with reputation and EPA stats, the tone shifted. GBUSH didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Calmly and methodically he began pulling apart Lloyd's argument, pointing out how it ignored the actual moments that define quarterbacks. Third down decisions, blitz reads, late-game poise.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Suddenly, what began as a casual critique became a spotlight on how easily the media overlooks what film reveals. Sanders wasn't just defended, he was reintroduced as a serious name for the future. That moment between GBUSH and Lloyd captured something bigger than debate. It revealed a media pattern that's overdue for disruption. In backing Sanders with real, in-game proof, GBUSH made it clear that today's quarterbacks must be evaluated with eyes open, not through the haze of legacy thinking or outdated models. This wasn't just about one player, it was about changing the playbook on how talent is judged. It starts like any other panel on UCSS, with Garrett Bush sitting back, listening quietly, until Jason Lloyd decides to lean on expected points added like it's the ultimate truth of quarterback performance. That's when GBUSH changes the temperature in the room. Calmly, directly, and with a sense of purpose that's hard to ignore, he launches into a full dismantling of the stats-first mindset that's taken over some corners of football media. EPA. GBUSH says. You're gonna talk about EPA when the man is out there running for his life behind that offensive line? The silence that follows isn't awkward, it's respect. What we just witnessed wasn't a rant. It was an evidence-based evisceration of the idea that numbers tell the whole story. Jason Lloyd pushes back. He argues that analytics don't lie. He says EPA is reliable, that it's a better measure of efficiency and success than raw box scores. He frames Shedeur Sanders as someone who's being overhyped, someone who hasn't done enough, yet to earn the benefit of the doubt. But GBUSH doesn't flinch. He goes right to the film. Watch the tape, he says. The kid's making reads under pressure, he's showing pocket presence, he's not folding when the blitz comes. He's doing things most rookies don't do, especially not in Cleveland. That's when the tone of the conversation. It's not just about defending Sanders, it's about changing the conversation. GBUSH isn't interested in babying Shedeur. He's holding him accountable but doing it with context. He points out that Sanders has had to adjust to chaos every week. Bad pass protection, unreliable play calling, and a franchise that's been stuck in a quarterback carousel for years. Still, GBUSH highlights what matters. Sanders' ability to stay calm, make calculated decisions and avoid desperation throws. He's playing like a grown man, he says. Not perfect but poised. In a league that eats young quarterbacks alive, that alone is worth something. The broader discussion isn't just about one player. It's about a culture of evaluation in NFL media that leans too heavily on spreadsheets and not enough on actual gameplay. That's the wound GBUSH is exposing on live air, real time. He says the media gets lazy. They recycle opinions. They lean on metrics without watching tape. It hits especially hard in Cleveland, a city that's had to sit through failed prospect after failed prospect. When someone like Shedeur Sanders shows even a glimmer of legitimate quarterback play, smart reads, control in the pocket, timely escapes, the media should be taking notice. Not dismissing it with numbers that can't measure pressure and chaos. What makes this moment powerful is that it's not theoretical. Sanders has already been showing traits that translate to the next level. GBUSH breaks down his composure even when the play breaks down. He doesn't panic, he says. He resets, scans and delivers. And that's with a D-lineman in his lap. There's a specific kind of maturity in Sanders' film. Not just athleticism, but discipline. GBUSH points to his awareness, the way he senses pressure from the edge, climbs the pocket and still gets the throw off. These aren't flashes. They're patterns. Traits that NFL starters are built on. The key to Bush's argument is that he's not preaching. He's not yelling to win. He's laying out what the film shows and calmly calling out the disconnect between what's actually happening on the field and what people like Lloyd think is happening based on charts. He brings up other examples. Quarterbacks who graded well in EPA but couldn't execute under pressure. Guys who looked good on paper but fell apart in the red zone. You don't win games with spreadsheets, he says. You win them with instincts, with timing, with control when it's 4th and 5 and the pocket's collapsing. Lloyd pushes back again, saying Sanders hasn't faced elite defenses yet. That the sample size is too small. But GBUSH stays focused. He never claims Sanders is elite right now. He says Sanders is tracking toward becoming a quarterback who understands the moment. Someone who's already showing the poise most young QBs struggle to find in year 3. It's not about declaring victory. It's about recognizing growth. And GBUSH is reminding the panel, and the audience, that sometimes the most valuable thing a rookie can show isn't stats. It's resilience. In games like the one against Cincinnati, Sanders' resilience wasn't a stat, it was a lived moment. The offensive line crumbled. The run game disappeared. He was pressured, hit, rushed, and still kept the team in it. GBUSH points to that game as a turning point. There were 5 plays in that third quarter that showed more quarterback potential than a full game from guys who get a pass every week. He's not exaggerating. He's calling out the way some quarterbacks get graded on a curve, while guys like Sanders are expected to be flawless. And then there's the way Sanders handles the criticism. GBUSH points out that Sanders never snaps back at the media. He answers questions with confidence, not arrogance. He knows there's work to do. But he's not begging for validation. He's letting the tape speak. That confidence is rare. Especially in a market like Cleveland where pressure swallows players whole. GBUSH makes the case that Sanders' mental toughness, not just his physical skills, is what sets him apart. And why he deserves a real evaluation, not a dismissive metric-based write-off. Go back to preseason. Even then you could see the blueprint. Sanders didn't light up the scoreboard every drive, but he moved with purpose. He processed quickly. He didn't try to play hero ball. GBUSH reminds everyone that this kid isn't trying to be flashy, he's trying to play quarterback the right way. And now, in regular season games, that foundation is holding up. He's still growing, sure. But he's not drowning. GBUSH says, you can build on that. You can coach around that. That's what a franchise quarterback looks like before the hype. That's when the debate stops being about metrics, and starts being about truth. Bush's final point was the one that stuck. He said what a lot of fans had been thinking but no one on set was willing to admit, that maybe, just maybe, Cleveland finally had something different. A quarterback who didn't need saving, who didn't need excuses, who just needed time. And in calling out that truth live on air, Bush did more than win a debate, he opened a door. A door for new narratives, for player-driven evaluation, for actual football minds to get a word in over the noise. In a media environment that often favors hot takes over homework, that moment felt like a reset. The numbers will always be there. But so will the tape. And for once, the tape won. So what do you think? Is the media finally getting checked by its own audience? Are we entering a new phase where real performance matters more than recycled analysis? Let us know below. Hit that like button if you're done with the stat-only arguments. Share this with someone who still thinks EPA tells the whole story. And don't forget to subscribe, we're only just getting started. Once the camera stopped rolling, the fallout didn't. Jason Lloyd, usually composed and self-assured, looked like a man caught between the old language of sports journalism and the new reality. He hadn't just been disagreed with, he'd been systematically dismantled on air, point by point. And not with antics or drama, but with football. Real football. The kind you have to watch with your eyes, not calculate on a spreadsheet. There was a tension in the room that you could cut with a dull butter knife. Even the usual backslapping energy of the panel was missing. Lloyd's brand had taken a hit, not just because he lost the debate but because he leaned too hard on the old methods. Metrics, reputation, and what the league thinks don't hold up well when the film tells a different story. And Garrett Bush had just made sure the audience knew it. The irony? Shedeur Sanders didn't ask for any of this. He wasn't campaigning for support or trying to start a media war. He just went out there and played football. Each game he took the field with a bad offensive line, inconsistent play calling, and no grace period. Yet somehow he kept making plays. Not spectacular Hail Marys, just smart, clean quarterbacking. Stuff that wins games in the NFL if you're patient. And when you slow the film down, it's all there. The pocket movement. The read progressions. The controlled aggression. No panic, no reckless hero ball. Just steady, confident quarterbacking. The kind that doesn't show up in tweets but shows up in wins. The kind that changes franchises slowly then all at once. But that's what makes the pushback so strange. Sanders isn't a loudmouth. He's not doing dance videos after losses or calling out vets in press conferences. He's composed, focused, and that quiet confidence makes certain people uncomfortable. Because when you don't give them a narrative to twist, they start making one up. Garrett Bush didn't defend Shedeur because of hype. He defended him because Shedeur's play demanded it. The eye test, the tape, the results, All pointed to a quarterback who was ahead of schedule. Not perfect but promising. And more importantly, unshaken by media noise. That kind of poise at his age? It's rare. And for some reason, it's not what the media seems ready to celebrate. Garrett Bush, meanwhile, had just put himself in the center of a bigger conversation. He didn't just win an argument, he challenged the framework. How analysts talk about young quarterbacks. How data is used to defend bias. How sports media punishes players for not fitting a preferred mold. The whole thing became bigger than just Sanders. His argument was simple. If we keep relying on metrics that ignore pressure, chaos, and real-time decision-making, we're going to keep missing quarterbacks who actually have the goods. And when you're dealing with someone like Shedeur, someone who's walking into a historically toxic franchise environment, you have to watch how he's playing, not just what the stats say. And how Shedeur was playing. Like someone who had already been tested. You don't fake poise in a collapsing pocket. You don't fake sliding protections against edge blitzes. You don't fake manipulating safeties with your eyes. Those are learned behaviors, and Shedeur was already putting them on tape. Game after game. The push to dismiss him didn't come from football people. It came from narrative people. Those who needed the Browns to fail because it made for cleaner headlines. Those who couldn't admit they hadn't watched the tape. And as Bush had pointed out, when you actually do watch the film, you don't walk away unimpressed. You walk away realizing this guy might just be the future. Jason Lloyd's arguments started to unravel in hindsight. Not just because they were rooted in metrics but because they relied on a kind of selective amnesia. He wanted Sanders to be evaluated like he'd had a perfect system, an elite line and years of prep. But the truth is he'd been thrown into a mess and came out looking better than expected. And when those metrics were stripped of context, their authority collapsed. EPA doesn't tell you how many times Sanders got hit in under 3 seconds. It doesn't show you the dropped passes, the blown routes, or the missed protections. And it sure doesn't reflect his ability to bounce back after a rough drive. But the tape? The tape shows Shedeur wasn't chasing anyone's approval. He wasn't trying to prove the doubters wrong on social media. He just kept playing like someone who understood the game at a deep level. And that's what Bush was protecting. Not hype. Not a brand. But actual skill and discipline being ignored because it didn't come with ESPN-approved credentials. This wasn't about potential, it was about proof. And Sanders had already delivered plenty. His numbers may not have been flashy but they were efficient. His mistakes weren't reckless, they were part of growth. His demeanor on the sideline? Calm, focused, not rattled. In a city where quarterbacks go to disappear, he wasn't blinking. Bush turned that into a broader message. One that resonated with fans who were tired of seeing young talent dismissed before it had time to grow. Why was the bar so much higher for someone like Shedeur? Why were people more comfortable nitpicking a 21-year-old's footwork than admitting he might be good? And more importantly, why did analysts keep pretending like confidence was a problem? Bush pointed out that quarterbacks should be confident. The great ones always are. It's only called cocky when people don't like who it's coming from. But confidence backed by tape? That's just preparation showing up under pressure. As the days passed, the conversation didn't fade, it grew. Clips of the debate circulated online. Fans rewatched Sanders' games with fresh eyes. Even some of his harshest critics started softening their takes. Not because of pressure, but because the truth had been laid bare. The game film doesn't lie. It never has. The whole situation exposed a deeper truth about how we evaluate players. Stats are useful but they're not gospel. Tape is messy but it's honest. And when a young quarterback survives the fire and keeps getting better, that should mean something. It should matter more than recycled skepticism. Jason Lloyd's credibility didn't evaporate, but it took a hit. Not because he had a different opinion but because he clung to it despite the evidence. And in sports media, that's a worse offense than being wrong. It's being lazy. You can't just phone in takes anymore. The audience is too smart. The fans are too informed. Garrett Bush proved that in real time. And Shedeur Sanders, without even saying a word, backed it up with his play. It wasn't just a win for him, it was a win for every player who's been misjudged, every fan who's been told they're too emotional, and every analyst who still believes that the eye test matters. People always say the tape doesn't lie, but rarely do we see it blow up live, mid-show in real time the way it did with Shedeur Sanders and Garrett Bush. You could see it happening across fan reactions too. As soon as clips of Sanders calmly sliding through pressure started flooding timelines, the narrative began shifting. Fast. Not all at once, but enough to notice. Enough to realize this wasn't a quarterback who needed protection from criticism. He needed protection from lazy coverage. Bush made that distinction loud and clear. And the more people revisited Sanders' throws, his ball placement, his touch under pressure, his command, the harder it became to cling to the tired "just wait" argument. It wasn't just a defense, it was a challenge. Bush essentially called out anyone willing to criticize Sanders without watching the games. Come correct or don't come at all. Because when you really broke it down, Shedeur wasn't just better than expected, he was better than some current starters. And that's what made people nervous. A rookie stepping into Cleveland, one of the toughest quarterback environments in the league, and not flinching? That shakes the status quo. It forces everyone to reevaluate what they thought they knew. And some analysts would rather double down on a bad take than admit the game is changing right in front of them. What stood out the most about Sanders during all of this wasn't a specific throw or stat line. It was how he carried himself. No media clapping back. No passive-aggressive pressers. He just kept the same energy. Every week. Even when the pocket collapsed. Even when analysts questioned his toughness or readiness. He never broke. And that says more than any number could. When Bush pointed out Sanders' ability to lead under fire, it wasn't about being flashy, it was about being real. Sanders wasn't playing hero ball. He was making mature, efficient decisions. Sometimes the best play was a throwaway. Sometimes it was taking a hit to deliver a clean pass. But always it was calculated. Meanwhile, Jason Lloyd's analysis started to feel frozen in time. He stuck with the EPA argument like it was a shield, but the crowd could feel the disconnect. Garrett wasn't just saying Lloyd was wrong, he was saying Lloyd hadn't looked closely enough. That he treated the stat sheet like gospel and ignored the church of game film. And the truth is Lloyd wasn't alone. A lot of legacy sports media had been guilty of the same sin. Bush just happened to be the one who finally said it out loud, and didn't blink when it got uncomfortable. His delivery wasn't smug. It was surgical. And you could see how much it rattled the old way of doing things. When you line up the plays side by side, the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. Here's Sanders diagnosing a disguised blitz pre-snap. Here's Sanders buying time with subtle pocket movement. Here's Sanders throwing with anticipation to a receiver who hasn't even broken his route yet. These aren't rookie traits. These are the habits of someone who's studied the game deeply. And more importantly, someone who hasn't been distracted by the noise. While the media kept poking holes, Sanders stayed in the lab. And by the time they caught up, the work had already been done. That's what real quarterbacks do. Garrett Bush didn't just push back, he drew a line in the sand. He made it clear, if you're going to question a player's potential, you better come with film. Context. Nuance. Not regurgitated talking points and generalized skepticism. That kind of conviction hit differently because it was grounded in substance, not spin. And Bush wasn't even trying to be a contrarian. He was just tired of watching the same cycle play out. A new QB gets thrown into a broken system. He flashes potential. The media demands perfection. He struggles. They call him a bust. Rinse and repeat. But this time the film told a different story. And Garrett wasn't letting anyone skip it. The most underrated part of Shedeur's season wasn't his arm. It was his adaptability. No matter what defenses threw at him, he adjusted. No protection? He adjusted. No run game? He adjusted. Press man with safety help over top? He adjusted. And in a league where defensive coordinators live to feast on young quarterbacks, that adaptability is gold. Bush made it clear, this wasn't about projecting talent. It was about recognizing it. Because if you wait too long to believe in a young QB, you end up becoming the last one at the table. And then it's too late. Everyone's already moved on. Everyone's already seen what you refused to. What's wild is that Lloyd didn't even need to be wrong to take the loss. All he had to do was be dismissive. And when you're dealing with a player like Shedeur Sanders, who's putting evidence on tape every week, dismissiveness becomes a fatal error. Especially when the audience knows better. Because the viewers? They've seen it too. They've watched the games. They've seen Shedeur standing tall in collapsing pockets. They've seen him eat hits and come back stronger. They've seen him trust his eyes, deliver strikes, and walk back to the huddle with the same unbothered swagger. You can't argue that away with a chart. The takeaway from all this isn't just about one quarterback. It's about how we value growth, how we reward resilience, and how we hold media voices accountable when their analysis refuses to evolve. Bush wasn't just fighting for Shedeur, he was fighting for a better way to talk about football. One rooted in observation, not old assumptions. And that shift is already happening. More analysts are starting to prioritize tape study. More fans are calling out lazy narratives. More players are refusing to let reputation outweigh reality. GBUSH's mic drop moment didn't start the movement, but it put a spotlight on it. So where do we go from here? The answer's simple: keep watching the games. Keep valuing what happens between the whistles over what happens on a stat sheet. Because numbers are a tool, not a conclusion. And players like Shedeur Sanders deserve to be evaluated with care, context, and curiosity, not condescension. GBUSH reminded everyone of that. And now the ball's in our court. Will we keep letting outdated metrics shape the future of the game? Or will we finally listen to what the field is telling us? If you're here for real football talk, you're in the right place. Hit that like button if you're riding with the tape. Drop a comment with your take. Did Bush get it right? Is Shedeur already proving the doubters wrong? Share this with someone who still thinks stats tell the whole story. And if you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do. We got a whole lot more to break down.